Well, Major General Rupert Jones, a former commander of the British Army's Standing Joint Force, is with us now. Hi. There was a weariness when I was speaking to the Ukrainian ambassador to the UK yesterday. How do you think it's going?
I mean, it's not surprising there's a degree of weariness. You know, that this war's been going on a very long time now, and it is exhausting as a process. So I suspect you feel a little bit of that. And whenever you speak to Ukrainians, you get this sense of determination, but it's hard pounding. And you know, we're all waiting for the big next move. So it feels a slightly uneasy phase.
OK. He also said that they were preparing for a spring offensive. It's getting a bit late in the day for that. What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, it feels as though it's coming together. You know, we shouldn't underestimate how hard a challenge this. We talk about a spring offensive as though it's an easy thing. The Russians, of course, have used the winter to strengthen their defensive positions. So when the attack comes, it's going to be a very, very tough thing. The indications are that it's close. So the Ukrainian defence minister has described about being in the final stages of preparations. And it was telling that Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General, in the last few days has made an announcement that 98% of Western equipment that's due to be provided has now been provided. So those are indicators that we're to some degree in the final stages before an offensive.
Not fighter jets, though. And I was speaking to Tom Tugendhat, who was sat where you are, Security Minister this morning, former serving officer, as you know, and he was basically saying that we're not going to give them fighter jets. Yeah,
I mean, I think that would be a mistake. So the Ukrainians will need to go with what they've got. You know, whatever they fight, whatever they've got now, that's what they're going to go into the fight with. The challenge will be integrating everything they've got into a proper force. It's all very well having tanks, but you've got to integrate it into a force. But I do think that the West must continue to address this fighter jet issue. They're short of air defence weapons and they're very short of fast jets. And the perennial refrain has been, well, it takes too long to train up the Ukrainians in their use, and figures such as a year are thrown around. Well, we're well over a year into this war. The sooner the decision is made to give fighter jets, probably F-16s, that are on very wide distribution on the international stage, the better. And then that timeline can start coming down. But they're going to have to do this offensive without them.
History tells us that wars are won in the air. Why is there such reluctance?
Yes, wars are certainly supported. I think I would. Yeah. I mean, air power is vital. Of course it is. And it's been very interesting in this war so far that the air has not dominated in the way that we thought it might. So the Russian Air Force have never kind of dominated in the skies in the way that we thought they might. But that's been a lot to do with it, Ukrainian ingenuity, if you like. The longer this grinds on, the more air power is important. I talked about the really strong Russian defences. You've got to unlock those. You've got to break through those, and air power is a really important element of that. Ultimately, though, it's the soldier on the ground who's going to have to make the hard yards.
Just remind us what you're doing. Yeah. Okay. What do you make of Russia rejecting the US's assessment of military casualties?
Well, they would say that, wouldn't they?
But both sides would say that.
Well, indeed so. I mean, I think whether you believe the National Security Council statement, which was 20,000 dead, 80,000 wounded since December, or whether you can question the exact validity of the figures, I think they're probably the best estimate that the West can come up with. They're indicative of a very, very high attrition rate. You know, the figures we hear coming out of Bakhmut, where the fighting has been so tough for a great many months now, you know, the Russians suffering between 6 and 10 casualties for every one Ukrainian. So, you know, I think those figures coming out of the American National Security Council feel entirely credible.
Why do we continue to talk about Bakhmut? Both sides telling us it's not particularly important, and yet it's been fiercely fought over.
Yeah, I think we keep talking about it because it's where the fighting is right now. You know, since the Christmas time, there hasn't been a huge amount of movement on the front line, and so in a way, Bakhmut has become the focus. And the Russians have been looking for their symbolic victory, even though Bakhmut as a town isn't that significant in and of itself. And of course, the Ukrainians don't want to give the Russians that symbolic victory, and they've used Bakhmut as a location to draw in Russian forces and drive down whittle down Russian numbers, cause enormous attrition on the Russians, and that's why there continues to be lots of talk about it.
And a final thought about the unneighbourly behaviour of Lukashenko. What's the West going to do about that?
I mean, I think they will continue to manage it. I absolutely defer to NATO diplomats, but I think they'll continue to manage that as best they can, and try and prevent any further escalation from Belarus.
And a final thought. Sorry, I just wanted to ask you about ammunition stocks. We're told that they use up. I think I'm right in saying something like our entire supply of ammunition here in the UK could be used up in something like 22 hours if there was a war like we've seen in Ukraine.
And of course that tells you two things. Firstly, that the UK and many of our allies are woefully underprepared, and we need to commit far more money into these sorts of ammunition stocks. But it also tells you the huge amounts of ammunition that are being expended in Ukraine. I think the Ukrainians are getting through something between 4,000 and 7,000 shells a day. The Russians, about 20,000. Those are huge quantities. And so stocks are a real problem. Again, the Ukrainians have shown great ingenuity of working around their lack of ammunition. But we, the West, again, have got to do more. The Americans are ramping up their provision. Some countries are going to their industrial base to increase capacity, but we need to do more.